The air in conference room B smelled like stale coffee and ozone. It was that distinct sterile scent of academic judgment. My hands were sweating so bad I thought the laser pointer was going to slip right out of my grip and clatter onto the linoleum. I wiped my palm on my suit pants for the 10th time. It was a cheap suit, polyester blend. It didn't breathe. I felt like I was being cooked alive inside a plastic bag. I looked at the clock on the back wall. 1 minute to go. 5 years. 5 years of missed birthdays, skipped holidays, sleeping on a camping mat under my lab bench. 5 years of pipetting colorless liquids into other colorless liquids until my eyes blurred and my carpal tunnel flared like fire up my forearm. It all came down to the next 60 minutes. My PhD defense. Sitting at the head of the long mahogany table was Professor Halloway, my advisor, my mentor, the man who held my future in his manicured hands. He was leaning back in his chair, fingers steepled, looking like a king surveying his little kingdom. He gave me a tight, encouraging nod, the kind of nod you give a dog before you ask it to do a trick. "You've got this, Kenji," he had told me in the hallway 10 minutes ago. He squeezed my shoulder. "Just stick to the script. Don't improvise." Let the data speak. I believed him. Odd, I was so stupid. I actually believed him. The other committee members shuffled their papers. Dr. Evans, the department chair, looked bored. Dr. Wu was checking her phone under the table. They were just going through the motions. Holloway was the star of the department. If Holloway said I was ready to graduate, they wouldn't argue. This was supposed to be a formality. A victory lap. "Whenever you're ready, Kenji," Dr. Evans mumbled, clicking his pen. I took a deep breath. The air tasted metallic. I hit the spacebar on my laptop. "Good afternoon," I started. My voice cracked. I cleared my throat and tried again, louder. "Good afternoon. Today I will be presenting my thesis on novel regulatory mechanisms of protein kinase in cell migration." I started talking. The first few slides were easy. Background info, stuff I'd memorized 3 years ago. The anxiety began to recede, replaced by the rhythm of the science. This was my work. I knew every graph, every error bar, every pixel of those microscopy images. I had generated this data with my own blood and sweat. I hit slide 12. "The core discovery, the Western blots that proved our hypothesis. As you can see here," I said, pointing the red laser dot at the bands on the screen. "The inhibitor significantly reduces phosphorylation at the serine 34 site. This suggests a direct pathway. Stop!" A voice said. It wasn't a question. It was a command. I froze. I looked at the table. Halloway was leaning forward now. The encouraging smile was gone. In its place was a look of deep theatrical concern. He pulled off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Kenji," Holloway sighed. He sounded disappointed, like a father who just found cigarettes in his son's backpack. "Go back 1 slide." I clicked back. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Is something wrong, Professor? That control band," Halloway said, pointing a finger at the screen. "In Figure 3A, the loading control. It looks identical to the one, Figure 4B. The room went dead silent. Dr. Wu put her phone down. Dr. Evans stopped clicking his pen. "Duplicating a loading control is a cardinal sin in science. It's data manipulation. It's fraud." I don't think so," I stammered. "I ran those gels separately. They might look similar because the loading was precise, but Kenji..." Halloway cut me off. His voice was sharper now, louder. "Don't insult the committee's intelligence. I'm looking at the raw files you sent me last night. The pixel density is identical. Did you copy-paste the control to make the data look cleaner?" My ears started ringing, a high-pitched whine that drowned out the hum of the projector. "No, absolutely not. I have the raw films." "I can show you the timestamps." Holloway shook his head slowly. He looked at Dr. Evans. "I am so sorry, Arthur. I had no idea. I trusted his analysis. I didn't verify the raw images myself until just now." He was lying. He was lying through his teeth. Halloway had chosen those images. Halloway had helped me format the figures 2 days ago. He had sat right next to me and said, "Use that one, it's clearer." "Professor," I said, my voice rising. "You chose that image. We sat in your office on Tuesday. You told me." "Excuse me?" Halloway snapped. He stood up. He wasn't the mentor anymore. He was the shark. "Are you accusing me of your misconduct? I have tried to guide you, Kenji. I have given you every opportunity, but I cannot support academic dishonesty. If you falsified this data, we cannot proceed." "I didn't falsify anything," I shouted. The panic was taking over. I felt bile rising in my throat. "Then explain the discrepancy." Holloway slammed his hand on the table. It sounded like a gunshot, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you tried to cheat your way through a PhD because you couldn't get the results we needed. I looked at the other committee members. They were looking at their papers, avoiding my eyes. They were embarrassed. Not for Halloway. For me. They thought I was a fraud. They thought I was a liar. I looked back at Halloway. He held my gaze. And for a split second, the mask slipped completely. The corner of his mouth twitched up, just a fraction of a millimeter. A smirk. He wasn't angry. He was enjoying this. He was destroying my career, my reputation, and my life, and he was getting a kick out of it. He needed me to fail. He needed me to stay. He needed his workhorse for another year, and he was willing to burn me to the ground to keep me. I stood there, the laser pointer trembling in my hand, watching 5 years of my life dissolve into ash. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the laptop at his head. I wanted to cry, but I didn't do any of that. I just shut my mouth. I closed the laptop. I said quietly. I walked out of the room. I left my notes, my water bottle, and my dignity on that table. I walked straight to the elevator, down to the parking lot, and sat in my beat-up Honda Civic. I stared at the cracked steering wheel for an hour. That was the worst day of my life. But let me back up. 'Cause to understand why Halloway did it, and to understand exactly how I buried him 6 months later, you need to know what happened in the lab. You need to know about the missing samples, the stolen grant money, and the one mistake Halloway made that he never saw coming. He thought I was just a quiet, obedient student. He forgot that he taught me how to analyze data. And I had a lot of data on him. To understand the betrayal, you have to understand the dynamic. You have to understand the seduction, because that's what it was. Not romantic, but professional. Academic grooming. I started my PhD with stars in my eyes. I was 23. I was the first person in my family to go to graduate school. My parents ran a dry cleaning business in Sacramento. They worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week, pressing shirts and inhaling perchloroethylenes so I could sit in the climate-controlled library and think about molecules. I carried the weight of their sacrifice on my back every single day. I couldn't fail. Failure wasn't an option. It would be a dishonor. Professor Halloway knew that. He smelled that desperation on me the first day I walked into his office for an interview. Halloway wasn't like the other professors. The others were frumpy. They wore sandals with socks. Their offices were messy nests of paper. Halloway was slick. He wore tailored Italian suits. He drove a Porsche. His office looked like a showroom for Herman Miller furniture. It smelled of leather and expensive espresso. On his wall, he had framed covers of Nature and Cell from the late 90s. "I don't run a lab, Kenji," he told me that first day, leaning back in his Eames chair. "I run an empire. I create leaders. If you join my team, you won't just get a degree. You'll get a ticket to the top." I bought it. I signed the paperwork the next day. The reality was different. The empire was a sweatshop. The lab was located in the basement of the old chemistry building. It had no windows. The ventilation system rattled like a dying tractor. In the summer, it was a sauna. In the winter, we wore parkas at the bench. There were 4 of us down there. Me, 2 other grad students who looked like walking corpses, and Elena. Elena was a postdoc from Russia. She had been in Halloway's lab for 7 years. That should have been my first red flag. Postdocs are supposed to stay for 2, maybe 3 years. 7 is a life sentence. Elena had dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. She barely spoke. She just pipetted, smoked slim cigarettes by the loading dock, and stared at the wall. My life became a blur of repetition. I arrived at 7 a.m. I left at 11 p.m. Sometimes I didn't leave at all. I kept a sleeping bag and a gym bag with a change of clothes under my desk. I showered at the campus rec center. My diet consisted of vending machine crackers and whatever free pizza was left over from department seminars. Halloway was never there. That was the biggest shock. The great mentor was a ghost. He showed up maybe once a week, usually around noon, carrying a Starbucks cup. He'd walk through the lab, slap a few backs, make a joke about how tired we looked, and then disappear into his office to take calls. He wasn't doing science. He was a professional speaker. He was a consultant. He was on the board of 3 biotech startups. He spent his time flying to conferences in Geneva and Tokyo, giving the same talk he'd been giving for a decade. We did the work. He took the credit. But for the first 3 years, I didn't mind. I actually liked it. His absence meant I had freedom. I ran the place. I fixed the mass spectrometer when it jammed. I ordered the reagents. I trained the undergrads. I became the de facto lab manager. I felt important. And when Halloway did pay attention to me, it was addictive. He had this way of making you feel like the chosen one. He'd call me into his office, close the door, and pour me a cup of his fancy Nespresso. "You're the only one I can trust, Kenji," he'd say, looking me right in the eye. "Elena is a workhorse, but she has no vision. The others, they're filler. But you've got the spark. You remind me of myself at your age." He fed my ego. He told me I was brilliant. He told me I was going to change the field of cancer research. He made me feel like we were partners, co-conspirators in the great game of science. Then came the R01 project. It was the beginning of my 4th year. Halloway called me in. He looked stressed. For the first time, the smooth veneer was cracking. His tie was loose. There were papers scattered on his pristine desk. "We need a win, Kenji," he said. "My grant renewal is coming up. The NIH is getting tight with money. If we don't land a big paper this year, the funding dries up, the lab closes, everyone goes home." He put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "I have a theory," he said, "about the protein kinase pathway. If we can prove it regulates cell migration in this specific cancer line, it's a Nature paper. Guaranteed. It's your ticket out of here. You get this data, you write it up, you graduate. Boom. Done." "What do I need to do?" I asked. I was ready to run through a wall for him. "It's going to be intense," he warned. "I need you to drop everything else. No side projects. No teaching assistant duties. I'll pull you out of classes. I need you on the bench 24/7. We need the data in 6 months. "I can do it," I said. "That's my boy." He grinned. The shark smile. "Make me proud." So I disappeared. For 6 months, I ceased to be a human being. I became a machine. I ran experiments in parallel. I had 4 timers going at once. I learned to sleep in 15-minute intervals during incubation periods. I lost 15 pounds because I forgot to eat. My girlfriend broke up with me via text message because I hadn't seen her in 3 weeks. I didn't even cry. I just archived the message and went back to the microscope. I was generating data. Beautiful data. But biology is messy. It's never a straight line. Sometimes the cells died. Sometimes the reagents were bad. Sometimes the results were ambiguous. Every Friday we had a data meeting in Halloway's office. "Show me the graph," Halloway would demand. I'd show him. "It looks promising, Professor, but the error bars are a bit wide. I need to run more replicates to be sure." Halloway would frown. He'd tap his pen on the desk. "We don't have time for perfection, Kenji. We need the narrative. Look at this outlier point here. If you remove that, the p-value becomes significant, right?" I hesitated. "Well, yes, but that's a real data point. I can't just remove it without a valid reason. The reason is it's clearly an error," Halloway would say, waving his hand dismissively. "Pipetting error, contamination, whatever. It doesn't fit the trend. The biology is true, Kenji. The noise is just noise. Clean it up. Clean it up." That was his favorite phrase. I didn't do it. I kept the outliers. I ran the experiments again. I worked twice as hard to get the clean data legitimately. I wanted to be a good scientist. I wanted to be like him, or at least the version of him I thought existed. By the end of the 5th year, I was exhausted. I was a husk. But I had it. I had the data set. It wasn't the perfect, clean line Halloway wanted, but it was real. It was solid. It proved the hypothesis, but with nuances. I compiled it all into a draft manuscript. I printed it out. It was 80 pages of my life. I walked into his office and dropped it on his desk. "It's done," I said. My voice was raspy. "I'm ready to defend." Halloway didn't look up from his computer. He was booking a flight to Maui. "Leave it there," he said. I'll read it this weekend. He didn't read it that weekend, or the next, or the next. For 2 months, my thesis sat on the corner of his desk, gathering dust. Every time I asked him about it, he brushed me off. I'm busy, Kenji. Grant deadlines, committee meetings, patients. I started to panic. My funding ran out in 3 months. If I didn't graduate, I'd have to pay tuition out of pocket. I didn't have the money. My parents didn't have the money. One night, late, around 2 a.m., I was in the lab finishing up a cleanup. Elena was there too, sitting in the dark by the fume hood. The red glow of her cigarette was the only light. He's not going to let you go, she said. Her voice startled me. It was rough, heavy with a Russian accent and exhaustion. What? I asked. Halloway, she said. She didn't look at me. He's not reading your thesis because he doesn't want you to leave. You do all the work. You run the lab. You fix the machines. If you graduate, who does he have? Me? I'm useless. The new kids, they're idiots. He promised, I said defensively. He said if I got the data, I'd graduate. Elena laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. She snubbed out her cigarette in a beaker. He promised me too, Kenji, she whispered, 4 years ago. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the gray in her hair, the despair in her posture. You're wrong, I said, but my stomach twisted. He's just busy. Okay, Elena said. She stood up and grabbed her bag. Just don't say I didn't warn you. Watch your back and watch your data. She walked out. I stood there in the humming silence of the lab. I wanted to believe she was just bitter. I wanted to believe Halloway was the hero. But the seed of doubt was planted. And the next morning, when I came in early and found Halloway's office door unlocked, I made a choice. I walked in. I didn't steal anything. I just wanted to see if he'd marked up my draft. I found my thesis in his recycling bin. It wasn't even stapled anymore. The pages were loose, covered in coffee stains. He hadn't read it. He had used the back of page 45 to write a grocery list. Milk, eggs, wine. And under that, in his distinct, jagged handwriting, a note to himself. Delay Kenji Defense 10 need prelim data for fall grant cycle. Extension. My blood turned to ice. Elena was right. He wasn't planning to graduate me. He was planning to keep me. To chain me to this bench for another year. I should have quit right there. I should have walked away. But I was deep in the sunk cost fallacy. I had 5 years invested. I needed that degree, so I decided to force his hand. I pushed for the defense date. I emailed the committee members directly, CCing him so he couldn't say no without looking bad. I trapped him into scheduling it. I thought I was being smart. I thought I was taking control. I didn't realize that when you trap a shark, it doesn't surrender. It attacks. The 3 weeks leading up to the defense were a psychological war zone. Once Halloway realized I had bypassed his gatekeeping by emailing the committee directly, his entire demeanor changed. The chosen one mask didn't just slip. It shattered. He didn't yell. He didn't confront me about the email. Instead, he became a shadow, a ghost that haunted the periphery of my vision, leaving a trail of subtle destruction in his wake. It started with the missing reagents. In biochemistry, your life depends on specific antibodies and enzymes. Some of them cost $3,000 for a vial no bigger than a teardrop. They live in a -80-degree freezer, organized in specific racks. I had a secret stash of the gold antibody, the one that made my key experiments work. I knew exactly where it was. On a Tuesday morning, 14 days before the defense, it was gone. I checked every rack. I checked the logs. I checked the trash. Nothing. I felt that first cold prickle of true fear in my chest. Without that antibody, I couldn't run the final verification gels the committee might ask for. I went to Halloway's office. The antibody is missing? He asked, not looking up from his Wall Street journal. He sounded bored. That's careless of you, Kenji. Reagents don't just walk away. Maybe you left it out on the bench and it degraded. You have been looking tired lately. I didn't leave it out, Professor. I'm meticulous. Clearly not meticulous enough, he snapped, finally looking at me. His eyes were cold, like chips of flint. If you can't manage a freezer, how are you going to manage a lab of your own? Maybe this defense is premature. Maybe we should postpone until you find your focus. I knew then. He had taken it, or he had told a lab tech to reorganize it into the biohazard bin. He was trying to rattle me. He was trying to make me look incompetent, so that when he eventually pulled the rug out, everyone would say, "Poor Kenji, he just couldn't handle the pressure." I didn't postpone. I stayed up for 72 hours straight, calling every lab on campus, begging for a fractional aliquot of that antibody. I found a grad student in a neuro department who had some. I traded him 3 months of my coffee budget for it. I kept going. Then came the digital sabotage. I arrived at the lab on Friday to find the main workstation, the one connected to the confocal microscope, rebooting. That was weird. We never rebooted it during a run. When I logged in, my primary data folder was empty. My heart stopped. My vision went gray at the edges. I felt like I was falling through the floor. 4 months of high-resolution imaging, terabytes of data, gone. I checked the recycle bin, empty. I checked the server backups. The backup script had been disabled 3 days prior. I sat in the dark room, the hum of the cooling fans sounding like a funeral dirge. I remembered what Elena said. Watch your data. I had watched it. I had password protected the folder. But Halloway was the PI. He had the admin override. I didn't go to him this time. I knew what he'd say. He'd say it was a system glitch or user error. He'd offer me a sympathetic shrug and suggest I take a year to regenerate the lost progress. Luckily, I am a child of the internet age. I didn't trust anything. Every night at 11 p.m., I had been cloning my work onto a rugged, encrypted external drive that I kept in my laptop bag, which never left my sight. I even took it into the bathroom with me. I plugged the drive in. The files were there. I didn't restore them to the server. I kept them on the drive. I let Halloway think he had deleted my soul. For the next week, I played the part of the broken man. I walked with my shoulders slumped. I let my hair get greasy. I didn't correct him when he made suggestions during our brief meetings. I wanted him to feel confident. I wanted him to think the shark had already won. But while I was playing the victim, I was also observing. Because Halloway was getting sloppy, he was so busy trying to bury me that he was neglecting his own empire. He started spending hours behind his locked office door. I'd hear him on the phone, his voice hushed but intense. I caught fragments of words through the thin walls. Clinical trials. The IP is mine. The student is a non-issue. Yes, the paper is submitted. The paper is submitted. That phrase haunted me. In academia, you don't submit a paper without the lead author's knowledge. I was the lead author. I had done every single experiment. If a paper was submitted using my data and my name wasn't on it, that wasn't just a betrayal. It was academic theft. It was the end of his career if I could prove it. I needed into his office. The opportunity came 3 days before the defense, the night of mock defense I mentioned earlier. Halloway had invited me to his office at 8 p.m. to go over the slides one last time. It was a setup for the verbal abuse he intended to heap on me, but I saw it as a tactical opening. When I arrived, he wasn't there. His secretary had already left. His door was slightly ajar. I slipped inside. His desk was a mess of confidential folders. I didn't have much time. I knew his password. It was the name of his Porsche and the year he got tenure. Pathetic. I logged into his email. I searched for submission. There it was. An automated email from Nature Communications. Thank you for your submission, targeting the PKC pathway in metastatic microenvironments. I opened the PDF attachment of the manuscript. My hands started shaking so violently I almost knocked over his Nespresso machine. It was my work. Every word of the results section was ripped directly from the draft I dropped in his trash. But the author list. Primary author, Sebastian Halloway. Secondary author, a postdoc from a lab in Switzerland I'd never heard of. My name was nowhere, not even in the acknowledgments. He hadn't just delayed me. He had erased me. He was selling my discovery to a biotech startup he was consulting for, and he needed me out of the picture so I couldn't claim the intellectual property. Then I heard footsteps in the hall. The heavy, rhythmic click of his expensive Italian loafers. I didn't have time to log out. I just turned off the monitor and dove under the large mahogany desk. The door swung open. Halloway walked in, humming a tune. He sat down in the chair, right above me. I could smell his cologne. It was Santal 33. I hated that smell. It smelled like wood and arrogance. He stayed there for 20 minutes. He was on his cell phone, talking to his wife. "Yes, darling," he said, his voice dripping with fake affection. "The Kenji situation is handled. He'll fail the defense on Friday. I've already planted the error in his presentation. He's too stressed to notice. After he flunks, I'll offer him a grace period to work as a technician for a year. By then, the patent will be filed and the paper will be out. He's a smart kid, but he's weak. He doesn't have the stomach for the big leagues." He laughed. A small, dry chuckle. "I'm the one who makes the music, honey. He's just the instrument." He stood up, grabbed his briefcase, and left, walking the door behind him. I stayed under the desk for another hour, long after the lights in the hallway went out. I sat in the dark, surrounded by the smell of his expensive office, and I felt something in me snap. The quiet Kenji who avoided conflict. He died under that desk. I didn't feel sad anymore. I didn't feel scared. I felt a cold, crystalline clarity. Halloway thought I was an instrument? Fine. I was going to play a song he'd never forget. I didn't leave the office through the door. I climbed out the window onto the fire escape. I went back to the lab, sat at my desk, and opened a new document. I didn't work on my defense slides. Not yet. I started a timeline. I started a list of every file, every timestamp, every email, and every missing regent. I began to build a dossier. He wanted a show on Friday. I was going to give him a goddamn opera. The 48 hours leading up to the defense were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Halloway wasn't just trying to fail me anymore. He was trying to induce a total mental collapse. He wanted me so broken that when I sat before the committee, I would look like a shivering, incompetent mess, someone who obviously wasn't fit for a doctorate. On Wednesday, he called for the pre-defense audit. This was a tradition in our lab, usually a supportive final check. But when I walked into his office, the atmosphere was different. He had invited 2 of his favorite loyalist grad students, guys who relied on him for their visas and wouldn't dare breathe a word of dissent. "Let's see the final figures, Kenji," Halloway said. He didn't offer me a chair. I opened my laptop. I had 2 versions of my presentation now. The dummy version I let him see, and the war version encrypted on my drive. I showed him the dummy version. He spent 3 hours tearing it apart. He didn't critique the science. He couldn't, because the science was flawless. Instead, he attacked my character. "This slide is cluttered," he'd say, pointing to a graph. "It shows a lack of discipline. It shows a frantic mind. The data is clear, Professor," I whispered, playing the role of the defeated student. "The data is irrelevant if the presenter is a joke," he snapped. He turned to the other students. "Do you see this? This is what happens when you let your ego get ahead of your technical skills. Kenji thinks he's ready for the world. But look at him. His hands are shaking. He can't even hold the mouse steady. How can we trust a man like this with a PhD? He kept me there until 3 a.m., making me change font sizes, colors, and margins. It was pure busy work designed to deprive me of sleep. Every time I reached for my water bottle, he'd make a comment about my nervous tics. He was gaslighting me in front of my peers, trying to make me believe I was having a nervous breakdown. By Thursday morning, I hadn't slept in 30 hours. My eyes were bloodshot, and my skin had a grayish, sickly pallor. I looked exactly like the victim he wanted. I went to the department's communal kitchen to get more coffee. Elena was there. She looked at me, then at the door to make sure we were alone. "You look like hell," she said. "I'm fine," I muttered. "He's been in the imaging corps all morning," she whispered, leaning over the sink, "with your original Western blot films. The ones from the 2023 set. I saw him with the high-resolution scanner. My heart did a slow, heavy thud. The Western blots. Those were the control bands he had mentioned in the hook. He wasn't just waiting for me to fail. He was actively manufacturing the evidence of my fraud. He was scanning my old films and digitally altering them to look like duplicates. "Why are you telling me this, Elena?" I asked. She looked away, her eyes filling with a sudden, sharp bitterness. "Because he did it to me. 4 years ago, he told the committee I had misinterpreted the statistical significance of my results. He made me look like an amateur. I lost my fellowship. I had to stay as a postdoc, just to keep my visa. He's a parasite, Kenji. He eats lives." She handed me a small silver USB drive. "What's this?" "The security logs for the imaging core," she said. "I'm the secondary admin. It shows who logged in, what files were scanned, and what was deleted. It shows Halloway was in there at 6 a.m. today, using the admin overwrite to access your archive folder." I stared at the drive. This was it. The smoking gun of his physical interference. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me," she said, her voice cold again. "Just kill him, professionally. Don't let him do it to anyone else. I spent Thursday night in the lab, not working on the science, but on the trap. I knew Halloway's move now. He was going to wait until the middle of my presentation, let me get comfortable, and then discover a discrepancy that he had planted himself. He wanted the maximum audience. He wanted the dean and the chair to see him unmasking a fraud. It would make him look like a hero of academic integrity. Friday morning arrived, the day of the hook. The walk to conference room B felt like a walk to the gallows. I could feel the eyes of the other grad students on me. They had heard the rumors. Halloway had been leaking his concerns all morning, playing the part of the heartbroken mentor who was worried about Kenji's stability. I entered the room. The mahogany table was set. The coffee was brewing. The air was thick with that ozone and stale coffee smell. Halloway was already there. He was wearing a navy Brioni suit. He looked magnificent. He looked like the personification of the science. "Ready, Kenji?" he asked. His voice was warm, fatherly. It made my skin crawl. "Ready, Professor," I said. I set up my laptop. I saw him glance at my screen. He saw the dummy file. He saw the slide deck he had forced me to fix until 3 a.m. He smiled. He thought he knew exactly what was on that screen. The committee filed in, Dr. Evans, Dr. Wu, and the outside observer, Dr. Eris. They looked tired. They wanted this to be over. "Whenever you're ready," Evans said. I started. The presentation began exactly as it did in the hook. I moved through the background, the methods, the hypothesis. I sounded nervous. I let my voice crack. I let my hands shake. I wanted him to feel the blood in the water. Then we reached slide 12, the discovery, the slide with the Western blots. I saw Halloway's posture change. He leaned forward. This was his moment. This was where he would play the hero. "Stop," he said. The room went silent. Just like I remembered, the ringing in my ears started, but this time it wasn't panic. It was the sound of a countdown. "Kenji," he said, his voice full of theatrical pity. "Go back 1 slide." I clicked back. "That control band," he said, pointing to the screen. "In figure 3A, it looks identical to the one in figure 4B. Kenji, tell me you didn't do what I think you did." I looked at him. I saw the smirk, the tiny, microscopic twitch of triumph at the corner of his mouth. He thought he had me. He thought he had just ended me. "I'm not sure what you mean, Professor," I said. I let my voice tremble just a little more. "I mean, is a duplicate," Halloway shouted, standing up. He looked at the committee. "I am horrified. I trusted this student, but this is clear data manipulation. I cannot, in good conscience, allow this defense to continue. This is a dark day for this department." Dr. Evans looked shocked. Dr. Wu looked disappointed. The room was heavy with the weight of my supposed sin. I stood there for a long moment, letting the silence stretch, letting Halloway enjoy the peak of his power. I wanted him to feel completely, utterly safe. "You're right, Professor," I said. My voice wasn't shaking anymore. It was dead flat. "That image is a duplicate." Halloway blinked. He hadn't expected a confession so quickly. "Well, at least you admit it. Arthur, I think we need to escort Kenji out and—" "But," I interrupted, "it's not a duplicate of my data. I reached over and hit a key on my laptop. A script ran in the background. The dummy presentation vanished. The war presentation took its place. The screen flickered and a new image appeared. It was a side-by-side comparison of the file on the screen and the raw, unedited film from the imaging core. The image on the left, I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room, is the one currently in the presentation file. The image on the right is the raw data I saved 3 weeks ago. As you can see, they are different. What are you talking about? Halloway hissed. His face was starting to turn a mottled purple. I'm talking about the metadata, I said. I clicked to the next slide. This is the access log for the department's imaging scanner. It shows that at 6:14 a.m. yesterday, an administrator logged in and replaced the original file in my shared folder with a modified version. A version that had been digitally altered to create the appearance of a duplicate. I looked directly at Halloway. The log shows the login ID used was yours, Professor, and the IP address of the computer used was the one sitting on your desk. The silence in the room changed. It wasn't the silence of shame anymore. It was the silence of a bomb with the fuse burning down. That's a lie, Halloway roared. You hacked the logs. You're trying to frame me. I thought you might say that, I said calmly. So I took the liberty of contacting the university's IT ethics office this morning. They've already mirrored your hard drive, and they found something else. I clicked the next slide. It was a screenshot of the submission portal for Nature Communications. It showed the paper Halloway had submitted, the one where he had stolen my work and removed my name. It seems the professor was so worried about integrity, I said, that he forgot to mention he had already tried to publish this data as his own. I looked at Dr. Evans. The chair's face had gone completely white. But let's not stop there, I said. Let's talk about the grant money. I wasn't the instrument anymore. I was the conductor, and the look on Halloway's face was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. To the committee, it looked like a spontaneous explosion of truth. To Halloway, it looked like a betrayal. But to me, it was the result of 14 days of surgical precision. You don't take down a man like Sebastian Halloway with a single slide. You have to bleed him dry, one data point at a time. The plan didn't start with anger. It started with a spreadsheet. The night I climbed out of Halloway's office window, I didn't go home. I went to the 24-hour engineering library on the other side of campus, a place where no one from the biology department would ever look for me. I opened a fresh encrypted volume on my drive and titled it Project Terminus. I knew Halloway's weakness. It was just his ego. It was his laziness. He hadn't touched a pipette in a decade. He viewed the lab as a black box. Money goes in, magic comes out, and he gets to be a star. Because he didn't understand the day-to-day mechanics of the experiments anymore, he didn't realize how much digital exhaust he was leaving behind. Step 1 was the grant fraud. Halloway had been bragging about a $2.40 million NIH grant for innovative protein mapping. I started cross-referencing the progress reports he filed with the university's internal accounting. I spent 48 hours straight comparing his equipment requisitions with the physical inventory in our lab. I found the discrepancy on page 74 of the annual report. Halloway had billed the government $180,000 for a high-resolution cryo-electron microscope upgrade. I looked at our microscope. It was the same model we'd had since 2018. The upgrade didn't exist. Where did the money go? I dug deeper into the lab's travel and consulting expenses. I found a series of payments to a shell company called Apex Biosolutions. The address for Apex Biosolutions was a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands. The registered agent, Halloway's brother-in-law. He wasn't just stealing my career. He was embezzling federal research funds to pay for his Porsche and his Maui vacations. This wasn't just an academic dispute anymore. This was a felony. Step 2 was the IT ethics sting. I knew that if I just walked into the dean's office and shouted fraud, Halloway would crush me. He had friends in high places. I needed an impartial, automated witness. I didn't go to the biology IT guys. They reported to the dean. Instead, I went to the university's Central Information Security Office, CISO. I walked in at 8:00 a.m. on Monday morning. I didn't look like a student. I looked like a whistleblower. I presented them with the evidence of the Apex Biosolutions payments and the fact that my personal research folders were being accessed by an administrator ID Halloway's outside of normal hours. I'm a PhD candidate. I told the head of security, a woman named Sarah, who looked like she hadn't smiled since the 90s. My advisor is tampering with my federal grant data. If this gets out to the NIH before you investigate, the whole university loses its funding, not just Halloway. Everyone. That got her attention. She didn't like Halloway. No one in IT likes a guy who treats them like the help. She agreed to place a digital tripwire on my folders. Any change made to the files would be logged, timestamped, and mirrored to a secure server that Halloway couldn't touch. That was the trap Halloway walked into at 6:14 a.m. on Thursday. He thought he was deleting my future. In reality, he was recording his own confession in high definition. Step 3 was the journal reveal. I needed to prove he was stealing my work for profit. I emailed the editor of Nature Communications. I didn't send an angry rant. I sent a formal request for authorship verification. Dear editor, I wrote, I am the primary researcher for the PKC pathway study recently submitted by Dr. Sebastian Halloway. I am writing to confirm that I have not signed the mandatory conflict of interest or authorship contribution forms. Furthermore, I am attaching the raw data logs that predate Dr. Halloway's submission by 6 months. The editor replied within 4 hours. They were terrified. Scientific journals hate authorship disputes. It's a legal nightmare. They confirmed that Halloway had submitted the paper as the sole corresponding and primary author. They also mentioned he had listed a proprietary startup as the primary beneficiary of the patent rights. I had him. I had him on theft, I had him on fraud, and I had him on embezzlement. But I didn't tell a soul, not even Elena. I needed him to feel the highest high before I dropped him into the abyss. I needed the committee to see him as the aggressor. On Thursday night, while Halloway was probably at home sipping a $200 bottle of scotch, thinking he had won, I was sitting in my Civic in the parking lot, practicing my delivery. I wasn't practicing the science. I knew the science. I was practicing the silence after he would accuse me, the silence that would force him to keep talking, to keep digging his own grave. Let him speak first, I whispered to my reflection in the rearview mirror. Let him say the words academic integrity. Let him scream fraud. The louder he yells, the harder he falls. I had also prepared a final contingency folder. If the committee tried to cover for him, which happens more often than people think in the Ivy League, I had an email drafted to the Office of the Inspector General at the NIH and another to the New York Times Science Desk. I was ready to burn the entire department down to get justice. I didn't sleep that last night. I didn't need to. The adrenaline was a cleaner fuel than coffee. When I walked into that conference room on Friday morning, I had the Project Terminus drive in my pocket. It felt heavy. It felt like a detonator. Halloway greeted me with that fake, pitying smile. You look tired, Kenji. Sure you're up for this? I've never been more ready in my life, Professor, I said. I looked at the dean. I looked at the chair. I looked at the man who had tried to erase my existence. I'm the one who makes the music, I thought, remembering his phone call. No, Sebastian, you're just the one who's about to get canceled. I hit the first slide. The countdown hit 0. The silence in conference room B was no longer sterile. It was heavy, suffocating, and electric. Dr. Evans, the department chair, sat with his mouth slightly open. His eyes darted between the metadata log on the screen and the man sitting to his right. Holloway's transformation was a sight to behold. The Brioni-clad titan of industry was melting. A single bead of sweat rolled down his temple, carving a pale track through his expensive bronzer. This is a fabrication, Halloway stammered. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a wet, desperate wheeze. Arthur, surely you see what's happening here. This boy is having a psychotic break. He's obsessed with me. He spent his final weeks building a fantasy because he couldn't handle the failure of his own project. Then explain the IP address. Sebastian, Dr. Wu said. Her voice was like an ice pick. She was looking at the technical report from the university CISO that I had just pulled up. This log isn't from the department. It's from the Central IT Security Office. Are you suggesting the university's head of cybersecurity is in a conspiracy with a grad student to frame you? I was hacked, Halloway shouted, slamming his fist on the table. Kenji has been in my office. He's been under my desk. I mean, he's been snooping around my desk for weeks. He stole my credentials. I didn't argue. I didn't shout back. I just clicked the next slide. Professor, I said softly, if you were hacked, then the hacker must have been very busy because they also managed to access your personal banking records through the university's reimbursement portal. I put the spreadsheet up, the Apex Biosolutions payments. The shell company, the P.O. box and the Caymans. We were looking for my data, I continued, but the IT ethics office found something else. They found that over the last 3 years, $450,000 of NIH grant number R01-CA234 was diverted to a private account linked to your name. This is the grant that was supposed to fund my research. The grant you told me was running low, forcing me to skip meals and live in the lab. Dr. Evans stood up. His face was no longer white. It was a deep, furious red. Sebastian, is this true? It's research-related, Halloway shrieked. He was standing now, his chair kicked back against the wall. The star was gone. He looked like a cornered rat. Consulting fees, proprietary logistics. You don't understand how the world works, Arthur. You're just a bureaucrat. I'm the one who brings the prestige to this university. You're the one who brings the FBI to this university, Dr. Eris, the outside observer, finally spoke. He had been silent the whole time, taking notes. He was a senior scientist from a rival Ivy League school. I've seen enough. As the external representative, I am formally suspending this defense, but not because of the candidate's work. He looked at me, and for the first time in 5 years, a senior faculty member looked at me with genuine respect. The candidate's work is clearly exceptional, Eris said. Exceptional enough that his advisor tried to steal it for a private startup. I am the PI. Halloway roared, his voice cracking. The data belongs to the lab. The lab belongs to me. Kenji is a pair of hands. He is a tool. I am the mind. Actually, I said, hitting the final key on my laptop. According to the Nature Communications Ethics Board, whom I spoke with this morning, you aren't the author at all. They've flagged the submission for plagiarism and fraudulent authorship. They've already sent a formal inquiry to the dean's office. I looked at Halloway. He looked like he was having a stroke. He was gasping for air, clutching the edge of the mahogany table. And there's one more thing, I said. Professor, you mentioned that I was obsessed with you, that I was under your desk. You're right. I was under your desk on Tuesday night. I heard your phone call to your life. I heard you admit that you planted the error in my slides to keep me as your workhorse. I recorded that call, Sebastian, not for the committee, but for the deposition. That was the final blow. Halloway didn't have another shout left in him. He collapsed back into his chair. The room was silent again, but the air had cleared. The poison was out in the open. Kenji, Dr. Evans said, his voice trembling with a mix of shock and professional embarrassment. Please, leave us. Take your laptop. Go to the dean's office. They are expecting you. We need to have a private discussion with Dr. Halloway. I nodded. I packed my bag. I didn't rush. I moved with a deliberate, calm grace. As I walked toward the door, I passed Halloway. He was staring at the floor, his face hidden in his hands. He looked small. He looked old. Professor, I whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. He didn't look up. The loading control was actually correct, I said. I swapped the modified slide back for the real one right before I started. You were accusing me of fraud based on a slide that didn't exist. You confessed to a crime that was only in your head. I walked out. I stood in the hallway for a moment, the heavy oak doors closing behind me. I could hear Dr. Evans' voice rising in a scream of fury. I could hear the sound of Halloway trying to weep his way out of a prison sentence. I walked down the hall, past the lab where I had spent 5 years of my life. Elena was standing by the door, leaning against the frame, a cigarette unlit in her hand. She didn't say anything. She just gave me a sharp, mocking salute. I went to the dean's office. I didn't feel like a victim. I didn't even feel like a student. I felt like a doctor. They say the wheels of justice grind slowly, but in academia, when a scandal threatens federal funding, the wheels turn with the speed of a falling guillotine. The university didn't just fire Sebastian Halloway, they exorcised him. Within 48 hours of my defense, the locks on his office were changed. His name was scraped from the directory. The Halloway lab ceased to exist, replaced by a generic biochemistry research suite. The university's legal team, terrified of an NIH audit, moved with ruthless efficiency. Halloway tried to fight it, of course. He hired a high-priced defense attorney who specialized in white-collar academic disputes. They tried to argue that the $450,000 was a bookkeeping error and that the paper theft was a misunderstanding of collaborative norms. It didn't work. The IT logs were too clean. My recordings were too clear. And most importantly, once the shark was wounded, the rest of the ocean came to feed. 4 other former students, people I had never even met, people who had left the program years ago with master's degrees because they just weren't cut out for research, came forward. They told stories identical to mine: sabotage, emotional abuse, theft of intellectual property. Halloway hadn't just been a bad advisor, he had been a serial predator of careers. The NIH didn't just pull his funding, they debarred him. He is permanently banned from receiving federal research money. In the world of science, that is a death sentence. You can't even get a job as a middle school science teacher with a debarment on your record. Last I heard, Halloway had to sell the portion the house in the hills to cover his legal fees and the restitution he owed the university. He's currently living in a 2-bedroom condo in a town no one visits, working as a technical consultant for a shady supplement company that sells miracle weight loss pills on late-night TV. The man who wanted to be a legend is now selling fake science to people in the middle of the night. I didn't stay to watch the trial. 3 weeks after the defense from Hill, I was called back into conference room B. It was the same room, same mahogany table, same smell of ozone, but Halloway's chair was empty. Dr. Evans and Dr. Wu were there. They looked older, humbler. "Kenji," Dr. Evans said, pushing a leather-bound folder across the table. "The committee has reviewed your full, unedited manuscript. We've also received the verification from Nature Communications regarding your primary authorship." He cleared his throat, looking genuinely pained. "We owe you an apology. Not just for the events of the defense, but for the years we spent looking the other way while Sebastian ran his empire. We failed you as a department. I didn't accept the apology. I didn't reject it either. I just picked up the folder. Inside was my PhD certificate, signed by the dean and the chair. "Thank you, Dr. Evans," I said. I walked out of that building and never looked back. I didn't go into academia. Why would I? I'd seen the belly of the beast. Instead, I took that war drive and the PKC pathway discovery to a venture capital firm in San Francisco. Because Halloway had submitted the paper under his name alone, and I had the proof that I was the actual inventor, the university's patent office was forced to settle with me to avoid a massive lawsuit. I started my own biotech firm. I called it Terminus Lab. I hired Elena first. I paid for her green card sponsorship and gave her a salary that was triple what she was making as a perpetual postdoc. She doesn't smoke by the loading dock anymore. She's my head of operations. She's the most loyal, brilliant scientist I've ever known, and she finally has the recognition she deserves. As for me, I'm doing well. My company is currently in phase 2 clinical trials for a drug that actually uses the PKC pathway to stop cancer metastasis. It might not be a miracle cure, but it's real science. It's honest work. A few months ago, I was back in the city for a conference. I was sitting in a high-end cafe waiting for a meeting when I saw him. Halloway. He was standing on the sidewalk, waiting for a bus. His suit was the same Brioni he wore at my defense, but it didn't fit him anymore. He'd lost weight, but not in a healthy way. He looked haggard. The jacket was frayed at the cuffs, and there was a noticeable stain on the lapel. He was clutching a plastic briefcase, looking at his watch with a frantic, desperate energy. He looked up and saw me through the window. For a second, the old Halloway flashed in his eyes, that spark of arrogance, that urge to sneer. But then he recognized me. He saw the tailored coat I was wearing. He saw the expensive watch. He saw the way the waitstaff treated me. The sneer died. He looked away, his face flushing a deep, shameful purple. He stepped onto the bus and vanished into the city traffic. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I didn't feel the need to chase him down or gloat. I just felt finished. The data was reconciled. The error bars were gone. The experiment was over. I took a sip of my coffee. It was a perfect, expensive roast. It didn't taste like ozone. It didn't taste like the basement of a chemistry building. It tasted like freedom. And as I walked out to my car, a car that I bought with my own money, from my own work, I realized that Halloway was right about one thing. He was the one who made the music. He just didn't realize that I was the one who knew how to turn off the speakers.